Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing related tweets, or you can subscribe to the channel, click that notifications button and get a new notification whenever a new video is uploaded. So what I'm going to start doing is a bit of a weekly roundup show. Okay, that's what I'm going to start doing. So if there's obviously a big boxing topic that I want to discuss specifically, then I'll discuss that specifically. But when there's little bouts of news here and there, I'll cover it weekly and just give my opinion on various topics. We'll start off with Anthony Joshua, and what I'll say is that we need to give massive props to Anthony, because as I said, if he had given up the belt rather than fight Alexander Usyk, personally I would have believed it was a duck. I also explained that I don't believe that Anthony Joshua would do anything like that. You know, I felt that it was more Eddie Hearn trying to push for that potentially, but that Anthony Joshua has proven time and time again he's willing to fight absolutely anybody, and as a result of that I expected him to fight Alexander Usyk, and indeed this seems to be the case. They're talking potentially about September. That's quite late in the day, so I'm wondering if, you know, we would then end up seeing the winner of that against Tyson Fury as early as December. It might get pushed to next year, but hopefully it would be early next year. In other words, hopefully this is a semi-final, and the Fury Wilder 3 fight is also a semi-final where we can finally get some closure on this division. But you have to give massive props to Anthony. He clearly does seem to be the guy that wants to go for undisputed. I'm sure Tyson Fury wants it too, to be honest with you, but Anthony Joshua has proven it time and time again by fighting you know, some of the top challenges that come his way. As Eddie Hearn said, and he's completely right about this, well, he says AJ believes that he punishes Usyk. Okay, he's not necessarily right about that. It's a terrific fight, and I do believe that Usyk is a terrific fighter and a huge threat to Anthony Joshua. But he says, but you have to understand that AJ is a throwback fighter. Look at that resume. Where's the easy nights? The easy fight? Let's fight Trevor Bryan and make $10 million and have an easy night. No, he's a throwback fighter, and he fights Alexander Usyk. And if he fights Alexander Usyk, which he probably will, look at the resume of this young man. He's 100% right. You know, you've got to give this guy credit. We can't come here and say, listen, if he doesn't fight him, it's a duck, and then if he fights him, just say, okay, it's a run in the mill. This guy's a real threat, and that's why it would have been seen as a duck. If he had not fought somebody like Robert Helenius, you're going to say it's still a wrong choice, tactically speaking, but you're not going to consider it a duck because Helenius wouldn't be considered a major threat to Anthony Joshua, whereas Usyk is. So you have to give the guy a lot of props, a lot of credit, and whoever comes out on top during this era, I've said it time and time again, will have to go down as an all-time great. And I don't believe that you can ever come out with a man who you say, this is definitely the best of all time. You can't do that because there are too many variables, too many subjective levels of analysis. But what you can do is have a handful of guys that are in the conversation. So currently you've got Muhammad Ali in the conversation, you've got Rocky Marciano in the conversation, you've got Lennox Lewis in the conversation. Well, by the same token, whoever comes out on top in this era will have to be in that conversation. And you know, you look at a guy like Tyson Fury, his CV is not as deep as Anthony's, but let's say he was to beat Joshua, or the winner of AJ Usyk, but let's say it's Joshua for argument's sake, and he was to beat Joshua, you're then looking at a career of a guy who beat Vladimir Klitschko when he was still considered nigh on unbeatable. You're going to see him beating Deontay Wilder twice, possibly 3 times in the eyes of most people, and then you would have seen him beating Anthony Joshua, and then he might have another fight against an Usyk as well, for instance. That's a very strong CV with a lot of signature wins, and a lot of these great fighters of the past, they don't all have necessarily the deepest CVs, but they have a lot of signature wins, or quite, you know, 2, 3 signature wins. Tyson Fury would also have that. Okay, so you're talking about both guys here that really are striving for greatness. You know, Joshua's would have great signature wins as well as a deep CV. It would be like Lennox Lewis, like Muhammad Ali. You know, so you'd have to put him in the conversation. So, you know, it's terrific that we're seeing this happening. It's delighted me, to be honest with you. I was worried for a period that it wouldn't happen, but it looks like that's where we're going with it. It looks like it will potentially happen. Now, in the other semi-final of Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder 3, the undercard looks stacked, which to me suggests that maybe they're not 100% sure that it will sell to the public as a standalone fight. A lot of people seem to feel that this has been done and dusted as a rivalry. Personally, like I've said, I don't think that's the case. Deontay Wilder is capable of turning any fight around in half a second, and any fight that he's involved in is going to be a huge fight that you're going to want to see. At least that's my take on it. Deontay Wilder is, you know, pay-per-view for sure. He's a Hollywood type fighter if you're putting him in with the right competition, because he has that ability. So it's a huge threat to Fury, but nonetheless the undercard is stacked. You've got Frank Sanchez against F.A. Ajagba. This is a really fun fight to see, a really fun heavyweight fight, because we know that F.A. is a guy that carries a lot of power, but as I've said here in the past, I don't believe he likes to move backwards. I don't believe he likes to be pushed backwards, and defensively I think there's a lot to be desired. Well, Frank Sanchez is a guy who has some real threat at his disposal, a real threat of an offensive threat for sure. He's got a reputation of being a really good mover. He's a good mover for a heavyweight, he is, but I don't want to exaggerate it like I think a lot of people are, because of his Cuban background. A lot of people are assuming because he's Cuban maybe he moves around like an Erislandy Lara, a heavyweight Lara. I don't believe that's the case. I think he's a good fighter, but I don't think, and a good mover, but I don't think he moves around like Fury or like Alexander Usyk. Okay, that's just the take I get on him. I think he's a bit more clunky than they are, but he carries a lot of power. But he does have that foot. He's a good mover without being a great mover, and he's going to be able to come inside on Ajagba. And is he going to be able to be in and out against Ajagba, who was also a very good amateur fighter? Are we going to see a case where it's a little bit cagey early on, and then when the fireworks do start to go off, that the fight ends quickly, because they both got the power to turn the other one's lights out? It's a really, really interesting fight, but you're going to be on the edge of your seat from start to finish, in my humble opinion. You've also got Robert Helenius and Adam Kownacki too. The rematch there after Kownacki was shocked by Helenius. Helenius will fancy his chances again. He said that he found a lot of openings in Kownacki, that he was landing shots, and that he feels that he would be able to take him out a second time, and it finally seems to be occurring in this fight. Look, Kownacki is the sort of guy who, whichever way you look at it, is a big puncher, heavy-handed guy, but doesn't have much head movement. Has he been able to rectify those issues? If he has, he'll get Helenius out there. And then all of a sudden, if he has, and you've got a heavy-handed guy that actually takes his head off the centre line, now you're going to have a guy who's a bit more of a problem for fighters. A guy who's a little bit more reminiscent of, a better version, you could argue, of Chris Arreola. He's going to be a good addition to the heavyweight scene if that was to happen, and he was indeed to show improvements and beat Helenius. So that's an exciting fight also. And the other fight seems to be 9-0 with 9 knockouts, Jared Anderson against Vladimir Tereshkin, who's 22-0 and 1 draw, with 12 knockouts. Now, he hasn't been in with any sort of huge name, Tereshkin, but he's a 6'6" Russian southpaw heavyweight, and he's coming up against a prospect, so that's an interesting fight as well. So it's a very stacked undercard. It's an undercard I'm looking forward to, a night of heavyweights, and the good thing is you're seeing a lot of PBC versus Top Rank too, so hopefully that's setting a tone for things to come in the future. We see some more cross promotional fights and none of this stuff about crossing the street. And talking about these promotions and who's fighting who, a fight has come completely out of left field as far as I'm concerned, and that is that Keith Connolly has spoken about Daniel Jacobs potentially fighting. He's made a multi-million-dollar offer to fight Joe Smith Jr. Now this to me has come out of the blue somewhat. I mean, I don't know if there was talks about this before, but Danny Jacobs was, albeit a big one, he was a middleweight, and he's going in there against quite a significantly sized light heavyweight. Now I guess the thought process behind that is, look, I've got a good chin, I've been in there with Canelo and Gennady Golovkin, so Smith doesn't necessarily hit harder than those two. He might be physically stronger maybe, but Ajagba-Sanchez has in the recent past said that he believes that Gennady Golovkin physically, and this is recently, not when he was his trainer, physically speaking, in terms of sheer strength, Golovkin is as strong as Beterbiev, which is a big shout to make, a big claim to make. But maybe he's looking at that and he's thinking, look, maybe physically he might be a bit stronger, he might not even be, I can take that power, but my movement against the bigger guys will be more pronounced. I'll look faster, comparatively speaking. So I'm fancying this. I'm fancying pulling off an upset against a guy who is a little bit crude. He's not a bum by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a guy that relies on his physical attributes, and we saw the fluidity of Vlasov cause him a whole host of problems. Of course, Vlasov's significantly bigger than Danny Jacobs, but he might feel, I might be able to do something here. What do you think about that logic? Can Danny Jacobs do something against Joe Smith? Or over 12 rounds, is this just a massive accident waiting to happen? There's also talk about Keith Thurman and Sean Porter fighting again in the autumn. That's a little bit disappointing to me, because although it was a terrific fight the first time around, I personally would like to see Crawford fight one of these guys. You know, I think, I'm not sure what's going on now. Are we starting to see Crawford being frozen out? Is it Crawford himself that doesn't want these fights? I find that very hard to believe. It makes no sense to me. You know, even if you're going to accuse him of ducking one guy, he's not going to be ducking all the top guys. This is a guy that's passed every test he's had with flying colours. He wants to start making some real money. So I can only feel as though it's Crawford that's being ducked by everybody. So, you know, I'm hoping that we see this fight. Let me know what you think about, we see him in a big fight. Let me know what you think about that. I want to quickly touch upon the whole Mayweather-Paul thing. Listen, if you watch that fight and you did watch my preview, you'll see that Logan actually did a lot of the things I said he should have done. I said that early in the fight, he shouldn't commit to the right hand. He should, you know, feint a lot, be lead hand dominant, feint a lot, and create a scenario where you're using your reach essentially and making Floyd come to you. And to see, you know, if Floyd's not having success early in the fight, in the first couple of rounds, considering he's the big name and the big star and people are expecting him to just walk through Logan Paul, it could create a scenario where Floyd starts to become frustrated and he starts to take more risks and starts leaping in, and you did see him start to leap in and take risks. And so Logan did a great job there. I also spoke about the fact that Paul would have to land something and then tie him up, you know, make it into essentially a low volume sort of fight where you're landing something and then leaning on him, testing those 44-year-old legs, taking that weight, leaning on him on the inside. And he did that. And, you know, you could see in the post-fight press conference, Floyd was frustrated about that and he kept using it as an excuse. Look, there's a significant size difference between the two guys. I'm not surprised. I expected Floyd potentially to take him out. I thought he would apply a bit more foot pressure. And I felt that he was using the forearm across the face to hold him off and then ripping the body. He was doing that, Floyd. I thought maybe he'd had more of an effect when he's ripping that body though, because we'd seen Logan Paul gas against KSI. So I figured over 8 rounds maybe Floyd would be able to put that pressure on him and tire him out. But like I also said in the preview, if he has developed into the sort of fighter that would be almost like a domestic level light heavyweight, that sort of region, he could cause Floyd some problems, physically speaking. Well, in the end he came in a lot heavier than light heavyweight. Perhaps I should have known that. He came in as a cruiserweight stroke heavyweight. So even if he's below the level of a domestic level or regional level in the US cruiserweight or heavyweight, there's such a significant pronounced difference in size that it didn't surprise me really that he was able to survive. And you have to give him props for doing a lot of the things that I sort of spoke about him having to do if he was going to survive, if he was going to have some sort of success. So well done to him. You know, there's no point in us just hating on the guy. He's hustled his way through this. We're going to talk about that in a moment though, and what it could mean for the wider sport. What I will say is this: Jake Paul, his brother, has been saying he'll eat Canelo Alvarez alive. Listen, beating a 44-year-old with elite skills, yes, he has elite skills, but way past his best, who is not a puncher, is very, very different from going in against a guy who can compete at light heavyweight, who can punch a hole in a tank and is at his peak. Careful what you wish for, because one thing I don't want to see is legalized murder on national TV. So just chill, Jake. I understand if you're just talking away or whatever. You know, you've got fights there that are going to capture the imagination against other, I don't know, grapplers, maybe guys like Dylan Dennis who can talk a lot, and you know, you've been having your back and forth online. Go down that route. Please leave Canelo alone. The other thing, obviously, by now you're all aware, Eddie Hearn is moving to the zone permanently and taking his stable with him. Well, Sky Sports have reportedly agreed a 4-year deal, this according to Mike Coppinger, with Top Rank, okay, where all their US fights will be shown live on Sky moving forward. Obviously they'll be in the early hours of the morning. They're starting off with Shakur Stevenson, Inoue and Lomachenko, all coming in June. So there's exciting fights ahead for boxing fans in the UK. I know a lot of people aren't fans of Sky. A lot of people don't like the way they conduct their business and stuff like that. A lot of boxing fans this is. I get that. But there are a lot of people that are boxing fans that are also football fans that will pay for the subscription to Sky Sports anyway. So for them this will be music to their ears. It will be more like a Box Nation used to be, you know, when it was showing those fantastic cards late on at night. I guess we'll get to see more of that. But how can Sky become a major player in the game again? Well, let's talk about this a little bit, because one thing that fans can learn a lot from the Paul brothers is, and not just the Paul brothers, but a lot of these sort of gimmick type fights, it's the way they capture the imagination. You know, it's a story rather than the substance. It's the style rather than the substance that tends to capture people's imaginations. Okay, if I was to come out here and I was to tell you, oh yeah, some woman had an affair at work with the boss, you're not going to be interested. You're going to think, yeah, well, okay, it happens all the time, right? But imagine I start telling you the layers of this story. That woman that works in the office, she's married, and he also works in the office, and he was best friends with the boss. They really got on, and there was all this talk that actually the boss didn't like her very much, and that if she wasn't the wife of his friend, she would have been sacked a long time ago because she was kind of incompetent. But she started to stay back after work to work on projects. Next thing you know, she's getting a promotion. Things are starting to get a bit difficult with her husband, but nobody ever thought that. Well, the next thing you know, the husband walks into the office and blah blah blah. It becomes a story. All of a sudden you've learnt the same thing, but all of a sudden this story is a lot more interesting. You're like, whoa, okay, what happened next? So the husband walked into the office. What happened? Did they fight? Did he confront him? Did he catch him in the act? What happened? You want to know. It's that investment in the story that makes you want to know about the fighters and watch the fighters compete. And so if Sky are going to move forward with this, considering that all the other top promoters are taken up, so to speak, Eddie's with DAZN, Top Rank, okay, they're going to be showing fights, but they're going to be late on at night in the UK. Frank Warren is with BT Sports. You've got some small promoters who, you know, they're stable, might have one or two promising fighters, but they're not necessarily superstar fighters that are going to capture the imagination, although there will be some talent there that can be shown for sure. So what does Sky need to do to rebuild themselves as a success in the sport? For me, they need to learn from that storyline narrative. Go and sign guys like O'Hara Davis, like Prince Patel. O'Hara Davis never should have been sacked anyway. He never should have been thrown under the bus as far as I'm concerned. I do believe that was the case. I think, you know, I don't think what he said about Hillsborough was, you know, meant in a malicious way at all. I don't think it was meant in the way certain people took it. The fighter he said it about was from Hull and not Liverpool, and so on and so forth. But what really should have happened is when you've got a guy who's hated, even if he'd said something so controversial, rather than go down the PC route, if you're considering the business aspect of things, if you've got a fighter that's hated, people are going to tune in to watch him lose. So sign guys like that, let him talk. He used to come down to the ring with the Undertaker music. This is a guy that clearly used to watch wrestling when he was a kid. I know, because I was obsessed with wrestling. He was a heel, he was a bad guy, he was the villain. That's how he wanted to portray himself, precisely for this reason. And people confused the two and thought that this persona was a reflection of who the man actually is. Well, in a way, if you're not going to then be, you know, sacked by a network or a promotional company, well, in a way that works for you, because now they really do hate you. They're going to tune in to watch you, just like they did with Floyd Mayweather for many years. Not very likable, was unliked by a lot of people. People used to tune in to watch him lose. And so Sky needs to start considering those types of fighters as well as the good guys. You look at guys like Nathan Heaney, you know, what support he had behind him at the weekend. Tremendous atmosphere. I know it's a cliche. They kept saying, oh, 600 Stoke fans in here, but they sound like 10,000. They really did. It was a superb atmosphere. Well, imagine you start to go down the route of not just the good guys in that regard, but you start to play on the football atmosphere too, and the football rivalry. You know, Sky at the end of the day still has rights to football, and with BT looking to potentially sell rights to football, as they're talking about doing, Sky might once again establish itself as the player in the game when it comes to football again. And if that happens, imagine you're starting to build on that. Imagine you have two evenly matched fighters, one from Sunderland, one from Newcastle, one who's an Arsenal fan, one who's a Tottenham fan, one who's a Man United fan, one who's a Leeds fan or a Liverpool fan or whatever. You start to have these rivalries, West Ham and Millwall, why not, right? It's going to start seeping into the crowd. Now obviously you're going to have the right level of security there, because you're not going to want crowd trouble spilling in that, you know, would have occurred in football spilling into boxing. But those sorts of things can be handled, they can be done. Sky could really open up a new market there where they're playing into the storyline. Now while they're doing that, they could also invest in amateur fighters that are part of Team GB. 11 boxers qualified for the Tokyo Olympics from the UK this week. Fraser Clark, Chevron Clark, Ben Whittaker, Pat McCormack, Luke McCormack, and so on and so forth. Gao Yafai. You've also got a couple of women in there, and Sky Sports seem to have been pushing that whole women's boxing sort of thing. It's not something I'm a massive fan of, but you know, Caroline Dubois, Lauren Price. You're going to have these sorts of issues now whereby you can potentially build up these guys for the future, and they could be potential stars if Sky want to invest that way. But while you bring in the short term, you bring in guys that are controversial, that are talkers, that perhaps are affiliated with football clubs, and that way you're drawing in the crowd immediately while you build up your stable of promising young fighters that are going to look to build in the future. And all of a sudden you're back in the game. And that's how I believe Sky should go about this. Start looking at that WWE model more. Start focusing more on reaching the youth with these guys that are essentially going to be characters and personas. I know a lot of boxing purists are going to say, Chris, man, I don't want none of that fake shit. It's too fake. I don't want it. What are they going to do? Start coming down in costumes? Well, listen, at the end of the day, I was interviewing Jack Hughes on this channel not long ago. The punk kid, Jack Hughes. You can find that video still online. And Jack was speaking about how he wanted to do these sorts of things. He wanted to come down with painted nails, which obviously you're not going to see when he's got his hands in the gloves, but in the boxing press conferences and stuff like that, he's got a whole bunch of ideas of what he wants to do, and he's been involved in a couple of terrific humdingers. This is a guy who, he's with Goodwin, he's signed with Goodwin. This is not a guy maybe at the moment who's going to consider himself going for world championships or anything like that. But if you can put together really exciting domestic level fights with real characters who might capture the imagination of people that love a bit of trash talk, and people that typically follow the Paul brothers and stuff like that, the younger generation, well, all of a sudden you're building a new fan base and you're drawing people's attention to the new guys that you're trying to build. So boxing to me has to start to look at that new approach. And I know Triller are trying to do stuff like that, but they're looking at it more from the music perspective. I'm talking about more like a wrestling perspective, creating a storyline, a character, creating personas and characters where they've got perhaps their own theme tunes that are coming down to the ring. Kell Brook, he always came down to All of the Lights, right? So why not have something similar like that? Let me know what you think, guys. Is it too fake? Is it moving away from what is pure boxing far too much? Let me know what you think about all the things we've discussed here today. And like I said, we'll start talking about more generalized topics like this once a week. Thanks for watching, everyone. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.